I've spent 30 years reading faces across poker tables, spotting the twitch of an eyebrow that gives away a bluff or the subtle tightening around the eyes that signals a winning hand. Never missed a tell. Not once. Until I missed the most obvious one sleeping right next to me. My name is Rodney Steele, 52 years old and owner of the most exclusive underground poker game in Boston. My father taught me everything I know about cards before the cancer took him. The house always wins, Rodney he'd say, shuffling a deck with those nimble fingers of his. But only if the house pays attention. It was Mrs. Perkins who finally made me pay attention. She'd been cleaning our summer place in Cape Cod for years, a nosy old bird with glasses perched on her nose like they were watching for gossip on their own. Found these in the guest room sheets, Mr. Steele. She held out a pair of men's cufflinks between her thumb and forefinger like they were something that might bite. Platinum. Initials RM. Her eyes narrowed behind those glasses. Thought you should know. I recognized them immediately. Robert Mitchell. My business associate. The man who'd eaten dinner at my table a dozen times. The man who'd shaken my hand while looking me in the eye. The man who was apparently betting my wife. I pocketed the cufflinks and kept my face neutral. The first rule of poker. Never let them see you sweat. Thank you, Mrs. Perkins. Must have been left by a friend who stayed over. MMM. She didn't believe me. The twist of her mouth said as much. Mrs. Steele was here last weekend. Said she needed some alone time to think. The emphasis on alone hung in the air, heavy with implication. I wrote her check with a steady hand and added an extra 100. I appreciate your thoroughness. After she left, I poured 3 fingers of bourbon and sat on the deck overlooking the ocean. The glass felt cool against my palm as I rolled the cufflinks in my other hand, the metal warming with my anger. Diana and I had been married 23 years. We had a 17-year-old daughter, Emily. I'd taken in my brother's girl, Sophie, after the accident 3 years ago. We had a life. The bourbon burned going down. I thought about the last few months, Diana's late nights at yoga, the new lingerie I never saw her wear, the sudden interest in her appearance after years of practical clothing and minimal makeup. My phone buzzed. Diana. Hey, she said, her voice casual. You at the Cape House? Just checking on some repairs. I kept my voice even. How's your conference going? Oh, you know how these things are. Boring speakers, bad coffee. She paused. I miss you. I watched a sailboat cutting through the water on the horizon. Robert Mitchell called the club looking for you yesterday. Said he couldn't reach you on your cell. The silence lasted 2 seconds too long. Oh, that's strange. I'd spent my life measuring beats of silence across poker tables. This one spoke volumes. I'll be home tomorrow, I said. We should talk. About what? A defensive edge crept into her voice. Just things. Family dinner tomorrow night? Emily's been asking. Sure. Of course. Relief flooded her tone, thinking she'd dodged whatever I might know. After hanging up, I flipped the cufflinks into the ocean. I didn't need them anymore. I had what I needed, confirmation in that pause, that telling silence. In poker, we call that the tell. The unconscious signal that gives away the strength or weakness of your hand. Diana had shown me hers. Now it was time to play mine. I drove back to Boston with the radio off, letting the rhythm of the highway fill my thoughts instead. By the time I pulled into our driveway in Brookline, I had a plan forming, not the whole strategy, but the opening moves. In poker, you don't plan the entire game from the start. You adapt. The house was quiet when I walked in. Emily was at swim practice, and Sophie was still at school. Perfect. I headed straight for Diana's home office and sat down at her computer. The password was our anniversary date. Hadn't changed it in years despite my warnings about security. Sloppy. The same kind of sloppy that gets amateurs cleaned out at my tables. Her email opened with a soft chime. I scrolled through her inbox methodically, finding nothing but work correspondence and sale notifications from clothing stores. Smart enough to keep that clean. But the browser history told a different story, deleted except for benign searches. Too clean. No one's browser history is that sanitized unless they're hiding something. I pulled out my phone and called Eddie, an ex-cop who handled security at my club. Need a favor, I said when he answered. Discreet surveillance. And I need phone records. Whose? No questions about why. That's why I liked Eddie. My wife's. And Robert Mitchell's. A pause. You sure about this, Rodney? Unfortunately, yes. I'll have something for you by tomorrow. The front door slammed downstairs, followed by the thud of a backpack hitting the floor. Uncle Rodney, you home? Sophie's voice echoed up the stairs. I quickly closed the browser and headed downstairs to find my niece rummaging through the refrigerator. At 16, she was the spitting image of my brother. Same dark eyes, same stubborn set to her jaw. "Thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow," she said, emerging with a yogurt. "Change of plans." I leaned against the counter. "How's school?" She shrugged. "Mr. Daniels says I have potential in physics." "Whatever that means." "It means you're smart, kid. Like your dad was." She smiled at that, a rare sight these days. "Aunt Diana said she's at a conference until tomorrow night?" I nodded, watching her face. "That's what she said." Sophie frowned slightly. "Weird. I saw her car at the Marriott downtown yesterday when we drove past on the field trip. Thought she was in New York." I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced. The Marriott was 3 blocks from Robert Mitchell's office. "Maybe you saw someone with the same car." "Maybe." She didn't sound convinced. That evening, I made dinner for the girls while mentally cataloging the evidence. By 9, Eddie had texted, "Got the records." Mitchell's made 67 calls to Diana in the past month. Diana's phone pinged near his condo 12 times after midnight. I deleted the text and poured another bourbon. The anger burned hotter than the liquor. The next morning, I drove downtown and parked across from Mitchell's office building. Not my usual turf. I operated in the shadowy world of high-stakes poker, not the gleaming offices of financial consultants. I waited, sipping coffee from a paper cup that grew cold in my hand. At 9:15, Mitchell strode toward the building's entrance, polished in his tailored suit and leather briefcase. I intercepted him before he reached the door. "Robert." I extended my hand, the picture of casual friendliness. "Got time for a quick coffee?" Surprise flickered across his face before he recovered. "Rodney, didn't expect to see you here. I, have a meeting in 20. This won't take long." I gestured to the coffee shop next door. "My treat." He hesitated just long enough to confirm everything. "Sure, of course." Once seated with fresh coffees, I studied him like I would an opponent at my table. The slight sheen of sweat at his temples. The way his fingers drummed against his cup. "All tells. How's business?" I asked. Good, good. Can't complain." He glanced at his watch. "What brings you downtown, Rodney?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "Tell me, Robert, how many times have you had dinner at my house?" 5. 6. I don't know. Several, I guess. "And in all those times, watching me with my family, did you ever think maybe you shouldn't be fucking my wife?" The color drained from his face. His coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. "Rodney, I don't. Don't insult me by lying." My voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. "I know about the Marriott. I know about the late-night calls. I know everything." He set his cup down with a shaking hand. "It just happened, Rodney. We didn't plan. I'm not interested in how you justify betraying me." I leaned forward slightly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end it. Today. And then you and I are going to have a conversation about consequences." "Are you threatening me?" I smiled. The same smile I used when holding a royal flush, while someone across the table bet their life savings on a pair of 2s. "I don't make threats, Robert. That's for amateurs. I'm simply telling you how the game is going to play out." I stood up, leaving my coffee untouched. "I'll be in touch about those consequences. Enjoy your meeting." I walked out, leaving him pale and sweating. The first card was played. Now to deal with Diana. The real game was just beginning. Diana returned home that evening with a designer shopping bag and the artificial brightness of someone working too hard to appear normal. I watched her from my study as she moved through the house, kissing the girls on their foreheads, asking about their day with exaggerated interest. She didn't come to find me until dinner. "Rodney, you in here?" She poked her head through the doorway, her face carefully composed. "Just finishing some work." I closed my laptop and regarded her steadily. "How was New York?" "Exhausting. You know how these industry conferences are." She leaned against the doorframe, not quite meeting my eyes. "The girls said you were at the Cape House yesterday?" Needed to clear my head. I stood up. "We should talk after dinner." Fear flickered across her face before she masked it. "About what?" "About our marriage." The kitchen fell silent during dinner except for Emily chattering about swim team. Diana pushed food around her plate, her appetite apparently gone. I ate methodically, fueling up for the battle ahead. After the girls went upstairs, Diana poured herself a large glass of wine. "So what's this about our marriage?" "I know about Robert." Her glass froze halfway to her lips. "What are you talking about?" "Don't." I held up my hand. "I have the phone records. I know about the Marriott." I've spoken to him. The glass lowered slowly. Rodney, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You've been sleeping with him for months. Her face crumpled, then hardened. It just happened. We had a connection now. Spare me. I kept my voice low, mindful of the girls upstairs. Here's what happens now. You sleep in the guest room. We tell the girls nothing yet. You get a lawyer. I already have one. You're just deciding everything? Just like that. Color rose in her cheeks. Don't I get any say? You made your decision when you took off your wedding ring at the Marriott. I nodded toward her hand where the ring was now firmly in place. And before you start worrying about money, know that the poker business is protected. Always has been. Is that all you care about? Your precious money? No. I care about Emily and Sophie. Which is why this stays civil. I stood up. One more thing. The Hadley Charity Gala is Saturday. We're still going. You can't be serious. Oh, but I am. The Steele family will make an appearance. Including you. I headed for the door. Wear that blue dress. The one you bought for him. It'll be your last chance to use it. Over the next 3 days, I made calls. First to Nathan Hadley, whose charity gala guest list happened to include Melissa Mitchell, Robert's wife. Then to my lawyer, ensuring the poker business remained untouchable. Finally to Eddie, who provided photographs from the Marriott, insurance I hoped I wouldn't need. Saturday arrived. Diana emerged from the guest room in the blue dress, defiance in her eyes. You won't humiliate me publicly, she said as we walked to the car. You wouldn't do that to the girls. I held the car door open. Tonight isn't about humiliation, Diana. It's about consequences. The Hadley Foundation Gala sparkled with Boston's elite, old money, new tech money, and the social climbers who orbited them. Diana gripped my arm like it was a life preserver as we entered the grand ballroom of the Fairmont. Her eyes darted around the room, no doubt searching for Robert. Relax, I murmured. He's not here yet. What exactly are you planning, Rodney? Her whisper was sharp, brittle with fear. Just a friendly conversation between couples. I guided her toward the bar. Bourbon, neat, I told the bartender. And a white wine for my wife. Nathan Hadley approached, hand extended. Rodney, glad you could make it. His eyes flicked to Diana. Mrs. Steele, stunning as always. Thank you for the invitation, I said. I understand the Mitchells are joining tonight? Diana's fingers dug into my arm. Yes, Robert's been a generous donor. Nathan checked his watch. They should be here shortly. 20 minutes of small talk with Boston's philanthropic set felt like an eternity. Diana grew more tense with each passing moment, her smile frozen in place as she clutched her second glass of wine. Then I saw them, Robert and Melissa Mitchell entering the ballroom. Robert scanned the crowd, his face falling when he spotted us. Too late to retreat. There they are, I said pleasantly, steering Diana across the room. Let's say hello. Rodney, please, she hissed. Don't do this. Do what? I'm just being sociable. Robert saw us coming and whispered urgently to his wife. Melissa Mitchell was a striking woman with shrewd eyes and a corporate lawyer's bearing. She frowned at whatever Robert was saying, then composed her features as we approached. Robert, Melissa, I greeted them warmly. Wonderful to see you both. Robert's handshake was clammy. Rodney, Diana, didn't know you'd be here. Nathan's an old friend, I replied. Diana and I never miss his events. Isn't that right, dear? Diana nodded mechanically, her eyes locked on Robert. How's business? I asked him. Still handling the Westridge account? Why, yes, he stammered. Just finalized the deal last week. Impressive. I turned to Melissa. Your husband's quite the deal maker. Always gets what he wants, doesn't he? Something in my tone made her eyes narrow. Sometimes he wants too much. Darling, Robert warned. I signaled a passing waiter. Champagne for everyone? We should toast to successful partnerships. Diana looked like she might be sick. Robert tugged at his collar. Only Melissa seemed confused by the tension, her gaze shifting between the three of us. Actually, I said, taking 2 glasses and handing one to Melissa, I'd like a private word with you, if you don't mind. Business matter. Before Robert could object, I'd guided Melissa toward a quieter corner, leaving Diana and Robert trapped together in awkward silence. What business could you possibly have with me? Melissa asked coolly. I don't play poker, Mr. Steele. No, but we share something else in common. I took a measured sip of champagne. Tell me, how long have you been married? 11 years this October. I've been married 23. Long time to build a life together. I paused. Long time for someone to throw it away too. Her expression sharpened. What are you suggesting? I glanced over at Robert and Diana, who stood rigid, barely speaking to each other. I think you should ask your husband about the Marriott downtown. I kept my voice neutral. Room 712. Ask him about the blue dress Diana's wearing tonight. The one he told her to buy. Melissa's face drained of color. You're lying. I wish I were. But I have the hotel records, the phone logs, the credit card receipts. I hadn't shown her anything, but I didn't need to. The seed was planted. She set down her untouched champagne with a shaking hand. Excuse me. I watched as she marched back to Robert, whispered something in his ear that made him blanch, then grabbed her clutch and headed for the exit. Robert looked panicked, glancing between his retreating wife and Diana. You should go after her, I said, rejoining them. Marriages require work, don't they, Robert? He glared at me with naked hatred before hurrying after Melissa. Diana turned on me, her voice a furious whisper. What did you tell her? The truth. Something you might try sometime. I finished my champagne. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Say your goodbyes. The drive home was silent until Diana finally spoke, her voice hollow. You've ruined him. No, Diana. You both did that yourselves. I kept my eyes on the road. I just made sure there were witnesses. The fallout came swiftly. By Monday morning, Robert's firm had placed him on administrative leave. Turns out sleeping with clients' wives violated their precious ethics code. Diana spent Sunday locked in the guest room, emerging only to weekly poke at dinner while the girls exchanged concerned glances. I told them we were going through some things, a phrase that hung in the air like smoke. We need to talk to the girls, I said to Diana over breakfast after they'd left for school. They deserve the truth. She stared into her coffee mug. What truth? The one where you publicly humiliated me. The one where you broke our family. I kept my voice level. I've scheduled a visit to your parents this weekend. Her head snapped up. You wouldn't. Already did. They're expecting us Saturday. I won't go. Yes, you will. I stood and rinsed my cup in the sink. Because if you don't, I'll tell them anyway. And I'll bring the evidence. Your choice whether you face them like an adult or hide like a child. The drive to Connecticut that Saturday stretched through 2 hours of tense silence. Diana stared out the passenger window, hands clenched in her lap. Her parents lived in a tidy colonial in a retirement community, the kind of place where appearances mattered above all else. Martha Winters, Diana's mother, greeted us at the door with suspicious eyes. At 72, she remained a formidable woman, her hair perfectly coiffed, her cardigan precisely buttoned. You're late, she said, ushering us inside. Your father's been pacing. Richard Winters sat in his recliner, a retired judge who still carried himself with courtroom authority. He didn't rise when we entered, just nodded at me and frowned at Diana. You look terrible, he told her. Not sleeping. It's been a difficult time, I answered before Diana could speak. That's why we needed to see you both. We settled in the formal living room, the one they reserved for important visitors and serious conversations. Family photos lined the mantel, Diana's graduation, our wedding, Emily as a toddler. A shrine to appearances. So what's this about? Richard asked. Your cryptic phone call had your mother worried sick. I met Diana's eyes across the coffee table. A last chance for her to speak. She looked away. Diana has been having an affair, I said simply. With Robert Mitchell, a business associate. It's been going on for months. Martha gasped. Richard's face darkened to a dangerous red. Is this true? He demanded, glaring at his daughter. Diana's voice was barely audible. Yes. How could you? Martha's hand fluttered to her throat. After everything we taught you about commitment, about family values. Save the lecture, Mother, Diana snapped. I'm 50 years old. Old enough to know better, Richard retorted. Good God, Diana. What about your daughter? What about your reputation in the community? I watched the familiar patterns play out. Her parents' disappointment, Diana's defensive anger. The Winters family valued propriety above all. This scandal would be unforgivable in their eyes. Rodney, Martha turned to me, her voice softening with sympathy that felt like sandpaper. You poor man. What will you do? I've consulted a lawyer, I replied. We'll be divorcing. Richard nodded approvingly. Damn right. No man should tolerate such behavior. Diana stood abruptly. I need some air. After she left, Richard leaned forward. You'll get custody of Emily? She's 17, nearly an adult. I met his gaze steadily. But yes, she'll stay with me, along with my niece. Good, he grunted. Diana clearly can't be trusted with responsibilities. Martha dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. We raised her better than this. I just don't understand. Neither do I lied. I understood perfectly. Years of her parents' judgmental standards, their conditional love. A husband who spent more time at poker tables than at home. Diana had been suffocating long before she found escape in Robert's arms. Not that it excused her betrayal, but I wasn't blind to my part in our failed marriage. Richard stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a decanter of whiskey. Drink, Rodney? Please. He poured 2 generous glasses, handed me one, and raised his own. To moving forward with dignity. Something my daughter seems to have forgotten. We clinked glasses. The whiskey burned less than the realization that I was now allied with the very people whose rigid expectations had helped crack our marriage's foundation. When Diana returned, red-eyed and pale, her mother wouldn't look at her. Her father simply shook his head in disgust. I'd like to go home now, Diana said quietly. The drive back was another silent journey, but something had shifted. Diana stared straight ahead, her posture no longer defensive but defeated. They'll never forgive me, she finally said as we crossed the Massachusetts border. I kept my eyes on the road. Probably not. Was that what you wanted? To make sure I had nowhere to go? No. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What I wanted was a faithful wife. What I wanted was the life we built. Turns out neither of us got what we wanted. 2 weeks later, Diana moved into a downtown apartment. The girls helped her pack, a somber procession of boxes and suitcases. Emily hugged her mother stiffly at the door, a teenage girl trying to process betrayal beyond her years. Sophie hung back, uncertain where her loyalties should lie in a family not technically her own. I'll call you both, Diana promised, eyes pleading. We'll do dinners, weekends. Emily nodded without commitment. Sophie just watched. After the door closed behind her, the house felt suddenly vast. I found the girls in the kitchen, Emily aggressively making sandwiches, Sophie perched on a stool. You doing okay? I asked them. Emily slammed the refrigerator door. Is it true? About Mom and Mr. Mitchell? I'd never lied to them. Wasn't about to start now. Yes. That's why we went to the Cape House that weekend? So she could be with him? Yes. Emily nodded, absorbing this. The whole school knows. Mitchell's kid is in my math class. I'm sorry about that. Not your fault. She pushed a sandwich toward me. You're not leaving too, right? Never. The word came out harder than I intended. I softened my tone. This is our home. Sophie spoke up for the first time. What happens now? Now we adjust. We move forward. I took a bite of sandwich I didn't want. And I'm expanding the business. Opening a second club downtown. Is that why those men were here yesterday? Emily asked. New investors. The Mitchell situation actually worked in my favor. Several of his clients switched their business to me. Good, Emily said fiercely. That night, I sat alone in my study reviewing expansion plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert's partner at the firm. Mitchell resigned today. Melissa filed for divorce. House on the market. Thought you'd want to know. I deleted the message without replying. No satisfaction came from Robert's downfall, just a hollow confirmation that the game had played out as expected. 3 months later, the divorce finalized with surprising civility. Diana waived rights to the business in exchange for the house. I kept the Cape property and moved there permanently with the girls. The ocean air felt cleaner somehow, wiped clean of deception. The poker world whispered about my expanded empire, about how I'd turned personal disaster into professional triumph. They had no idea. The real victory wasn't in the new club or the doubled profits. It was waking up each morning with my dignity intact, showing my daughter and niece what resilience looked like. The best hand isn't always the one you're dealt. Sometimes it's the one you play despite the odds. 1 year later, I stood at the helm of my boat, a 40-foot Catalina I'd named House Advantage, guiding it through Cape Cod Bay. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the water. Behind me, Emily and Sophie lounged on the deck, college brochures scattered between them. Emily had swimming scholarship offers from 3 schools. Sophie was eyeing MIT's physics program. Both of them stronger for having weathered the storm. How much farther to Provincetown? Sophie called over the engine's purr. Another hour, I replied. We'll make the restaurant reservation. The reservation was for 3. Catherine would be waiting at the dock, the marine biologist I'd met during a conservation fundraiser 6 months back. A woman who called bullshit when she saw it and valued honesty above all else. I adjusted course slightly, watching the compass settle. Diana's Christmas card had arrived yesterday, postmarked Colorado, where she'd moved after selling the house. The new teaching position suited her, she wrote. The mountains were healing. No mention of regrets, but the card itself was an olive branch of sorts. Robert Mitchell had left Boston entirely. Last I heard, He was working for half his former salary at a struggling firm in Phoenix. Melissa had gotten everything in the divorce, the house, the cars, the vacation property. Turns out she learned a few things from me about playing the long game. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Eddie. Final paperwork signed on the Atlantic City property. You're officially bicoastal boss. The empire had indeed expanded, 3 clubs now, with a 4th on the way. Turns out betrayal had been good for business. Men who'd never trusted me before saw how I'd handled the situation and decided I was someone they wanted in their corner. Is that Catherine? Emily asked, nodding toward the phone. Business, I replied, tucking it away. The Atlantic City deal closed. Mom said you're becoming a tycoon. Emily squinted against the sun. Said you turn lemons into gold. That what she said? I adjusted my sunglasses. Interesting perspective. I think you just played the hand you were dealt, Sophie added, ever the pragmatist. I smiled at that. The girls had grown wise beyond their years. They understood what mattered now, not the facade of family we'd maintained, but the honest reality we'd built from the wreckage. The Provincetown harbor appeared on the horizon, boats bobbing in the late spring sunshine. I could already see Catherine waiting, her red hair catching the light. No pretenses between us, no lies. Just 2 people who learned the hard way what mattered. Ready to dock? I called to the girls. Ready, they answered in unison, moving to their positions with practiced ease. As we glided toward the mooring, I caught my reflection in the boat's polished surface, leaner, grayer at the temples, but standing straighter than I had in years. The man who stared back wasn't broken or bitter. He was rebuilt, reinvented. Some men find out they've been betrayed and let it destroy them. They become cautionary tales, bitter shells warning others about faithless women. Not me. I'd refuse to be anyone's victim. Instead, I'd become something better, a man who knew his worth, who'd shown his family what dignity looked like in the face of betrayal. The boat eased against the dock. Catherine waved, her smile genuine. The girls waved back, already fond of her straightforward nature. Nice landing, she called as I secured the line. Dinner's waiting. I stepped onto solid ground, leaving the choppy waters behind. Some hands you lose. Some hands you win. But it's how you play them that defines you. And I'd played mine perfectly.